I am starting a new weekly series called Grain of the Week, as you saw in the title. And I'm going to pick one grain and just get really in depth with it. We're going to talk about flavor profile, the nutritional value, what it's best used for, and its properties, how you have to work with it different maybe, or maybe some little tips and tricks to help you work with that particular grain. I thought it would be so much fun. So sit back and enjoy learning about every single grain in depth. If you are brand new to fresh milled flour, this is going to be great for you because you're going to want to know which wheat berries work for which products, but more importantly, why. And so that's what we're getting into with this grain of the week. And I hope that by the end of it, you will feel empowered at picking the right grain for your bread products and different dishes. And so, all right, let's get started. So to start things off, I'm going to be talking about what I like to call the boutique grain because it's the cool kid on the block, and we're talking about einkorn. Everybody talks about einkorn. I get more questions about this grain than any other grain that there is, and so I thought it would be appropriate to start the video with einkorn. So einkorn is really popular. And I think it's not just because of flavor, but because of the health benefits. There are so many people like myself who struggle with digestive issues or stomach issues when eating certain bread products. And a lot of people have found that when they eat einkorn, they don't notice those problems. Now you're going to notice me looking down a little bit because I don't want to mess up some of this information I'm going to give you about einkorn. So I want to break this video down to flavor profile, tips and tricks on using the grain, what the grain would be best suited for, and nutritional properties. But I want to give you just a brief little history. You'll see me looking down from time to time because I have some information pulled up and I don't want to say it wrong, but it is a grain that dates back around 10,000 years is what they're saying. So anyways, it's old. The German word Einkorn translates to one kernel because each spikelet contains only one grain. So if we grew turkey red and spelt here. Each spikelet had several grains, pods. With einkorn, it has a single pod with a single kernel. And so that's how it gets its name. It's known for its unique flavor. We're going to get into that, nutritional value, all of that. And so let's talk about the flavor profile of einkorn. I'm going on how it tastes to me. To me, it has a nutty, almost earthy flavor. So it tastes hearty and natural and but not in a off-putting way. It is actually a really delicious grain. It does take a little time. If all you've ever eaten is white bread from the store, it does take a little time to kind of acclimate your taste buds to it because it is a much stronger flavor than what you would get with white flour or even hard white wheat. Freshly milled, and so you are getting a stronger flavor. Now there is an all-purpose einkorn flour, which I'm not really talking about today, that is super sifted and it's just the all-purpose flour, so it's not as strong in that flavor. But talking about freshly milled einkorn, it does have quite the flavor, and this really works well in things like muffins and pancakes because it gives them this added flavor, and because you're adding other ingredients like honey or maple syrup, it really kind of cuts that, and it's a dish or a baked good that you can give your family when you're first trying to get the einkorn started that they won't notice as much, and it can kind of acclimate them to that flavor profile. Okay, let's talk about the properties of einkorn as far as using it and my tips and tricks. So einkorn has a very weak gluten structure. It is genetically completely different from other grains, and it doesn't take to kneading as much or working as much. The more you mess with it, the stickier it gets. And so I find that the very best way, and although I will say this, although I have a couple of recipes on my blog for einkorn sandwich bread where I use the stand mixer, I have kind of evolved into just folding the dough over time, kind of like you would do for an artisan loaf. I find that I get a much better gluten structure that way and get a better end product. It just doesn't like that. And so what I have found is gently pulling on the dough and folding it over, and doing that several times throughout the first few hours of the rise makes all the difference. I can get to a pretty stretchy dough by doing it slowly and carefully. Another thing that I would say is that einkorn also doesn't like yeast as much as sourdough. This is in my experience. It seems like it kind of loses structure because yeast, is so fast with growing or with rising. With sourdough, that slower process seems to lend to a much better experience working with einkorn. For me, anyway, I like that you can catch things way better with a slow, drawn-out process than a quicker process. And that to say, a long fermented, freshly milled einkorn sourdough bread is going to be the healthiest bread because it's just so packed with nutrition. And that's going to take us into the next segment. So when we talk about the nutritional properties of einkorn, I just want to read this to you. It is high in protein, phosphorus, potassium, carotene, and contains more lutein, manganese, zinc, and phosphorus than regular wheat. And what that tells you is that it has more nutrition than like hard white wheat, hard red wheat. It's just packed with nutrition. And freshly milled flour in and of itself is packed with fiber, which is so important. We are so lacking in fiber in the American diet. And I have found this to be one of the biggest helps for me personally with my problems and my stomach issues is eating more fiber. Freshly milled flour will give that to you, and freshly milled einkorn will also give you a ton more nutrients than what you would get with regular flour. Also, as I said before, it has a weaker gluten structure, and that means that it is going to be a bit easier for you to digest than your commercial wheats or your modern day freshly milled wheat even. So it's kind of a win-win, and once you get used to using it, you actually enjoy it. It's a fun process. It's just getting over that little hump of learning how to treat it completely differently than what you would your modern wheat. So let's talk about what bread products are best suited for einkorn. I would say all, because I have been spending a lot of time over the past couple of months using it a lot and making recipes and trying to learn how to use it. Whereas I used it in the past, but I never really just dug in and got really comfortable with it and felt confident in using einkorn in any type of recipe. But if you're just starting out, I would say einkorn is the perfect substitute for soft white wheat in muffins, pancakes, biscuits, anything like that, cakes. It is also really good to use in things like your bread recipes as a portion. So you can do like 75% hard white wheat and 25% einkorn, and you're still going to get that boost of nutrition, but it's going to be easier to work with. Now, as you get used to using it and you want to broaden what you make with it, you may be like me and would like to eventually just make most things out of einkorn. You can make anything. Sourdough bread. Today I'm making sourdough dinner rolls out of freshly milled einkorn. And I make an artisan loaf, I make a sandwich bread loaf. And so you can come up with that. Your expectations with Einkorn probably need to be a bit lower than using a modern wheat in as far as the oven spring. You still get a good oven spring, so don't misunderstand me. But you may notice that it is not quite as fluffy as like a hard white wheat loaf. But the nutritional value far outweighs the small lack of oven spring that you might get with Einkorn. So I would say start out with those easy recipes, those quick recipes, things that don't need a big rise. And then do something like these dinner rolls where it's still not like this huge rise, but it gets you used to how to work with a dough that has to rise. And yeah, so that's what I would start out with, and just kind of work with it slowly. You'll get used to it. I think that the best way for me anyway, that I learned how to work with Einkorn is by messing up, because I did. And not so bad that we couldn't eat it. I've never wasted anything that I tried to make with Einkorn, but I had to learn how far I could go with working with it and how much flour, because you have to use a bit of a different amount of flour. I find that I have to use just a little bit more Einkorn flour than I do with my freshly milled hard white wheat. And so for like dinner rolls, I use 500 grams of flour to the 225 grams of water, 100 grams of starter, and some honey and olive oil. That sounds like a lot of flour for that amount of liquid, but it soaks it up. So it really, you kind of need just a little bit more. So if say you're making a recipe for biscuits that calls for 2 cups, I would go 2.5 cups to kind of make up for that difference. So that is my recommendation as far as how to use Einkorn flour when you're first starting out. I do get a lot of questions about where I get my Einkorn. I order my Einkorn from ancientgrains.com, and it's very clean, comes in this huge bag. I think I got 50 pounds. You can even get big buckets, but I have so many buckets. I just buy the bags and refill the buckets. But I get 50 pounds at a time, and while it seems expensive to do that, the Einkorn grain will last for years if you store it correctly. So I feel like it's, it really kind of works its way out. If I was buying the flour, or if I was buying small bags over and over again, I'm actually coming out by buying the 50 pounds. You can also buy Einkorn wheat on Azure, I think, and Pleasant Hill Grains, but I have found Ancient Grains to be my best. I get a lot of questions. I want to address this really quickly. Why I don't use Azure Standard. We don't have a drop-off. The closest one is like 2.5 hours away. And so that's why I never talk about them, but I'm going to try to always make it a point to say you can order Einkorn from Azure if you have a drop-off nearby. I'm thinking they ship, but I'm not sure what the costs would be for the shipping. So, but that's where I get my Einkorn berries. 50 pounds will last me many months, and I bake a lot. So if you get 50 pounds, you'll be good, some people for a year. And so it's really worth it, I think, to just get it once and be done with it. So in conclusion, Einkorn is the cool kid on the block when it comes to grains, for good reason. The flavor and the nutritional value alone make it a very appealing grain to use in your kitchen. And I'm so glad that I have jumped in and really gotten used to using it, because we are loving the flavor. I'm loving the way that it makes me feel. And I challenge you to buy a small bag if you haven't yet and you're milling your own wheat. Buy a 5-pound bag and try it out and see what you think. You may be surprised at how amazing it tastes. Even after you've used hard white wheat or soft white wheat, you may be surprised at the complete difference in flavor profile with Einkorn. Thank you for joining me on this grain of the week as we talked about Einkorn. Next week, we are going to talk about a whole new grain. And if you have one in particular that you want me to profile, then leave it in the comment section below. I will leave a link to an article about Einkorn in the description box below. I'm also going to leave a few of my favorite Einkorn recipes from my blog so that you can get started baking with it as soon as possible. If you don't have a grain mill, check my description box. I use Nutri-Mill grain mills. I have all of them because, you know, I test them out for you all. But I love all of their grain mills, and I want to let you know that there is a coupon code in the description box if you do decide to get one for $20 off, and just go check them out. So I will see you back here next week with a brand new grain of the week.